Hey there everyone, welcome back to the Chronicles of a Reader, and I am the aforementioned reader, Varsha. I'm so delighted to have you all here. So I haven't filmed a video in quite a while, maybe even 2 months, and today I decided to pick up the camera because why not? I felt the urge to film my February reading wrap-up, which I am terribly behind on. Today is the 13th of March, and by the time this video goes up, it will probably be halfway through March, but better late than never. So let's just get into all the 11 books that I read during the month of February, which somehow, despite being the shortest month of the year, turned out to be a really good reading month in terms of the number of books I got read. And I did enjoy most of the books I read, so it was a pretty good month in terms of reading quality as well. Without further ado, let's just get into all the books I read. So I have recorded my thoughts in this journal here because this video is quite spur of the moment and I don't have my thoughts in order, so I just have to refer to this handy little journal in which I write everything that I think about the books that I read, where I am somehow more coherent, where I'm somewhat more coherent than I will be in this video. So if you just see me flipping through this looking for my next thought, that's because my brain is rather fried right now. The summer heat really does a number to your sanity. Now this is a pile of all the physical books that I read last month. I usually get all my reading done through borrowed books, and all of them are actually borrowed. And then I do a bit of digital reading too, which accounts for the remaining 7 books in this list. So I'll just go through the books I read chronologically. Let's just set this pile here for now. The first book that I read in February was The Circle of Karma by Kunzang Chejin, and this is actually a carryover book from January, and it was supposed to be for the Around the World reading challenge that I do with 2 of my friends in a book club that we have, and none of us read the book in time in January, so I just finished it up as the first book of February. The book club is honestly kind of a failure. I swear I'm the only one reading any of these books, but I can discuss them all on my channel at least. Circle of Karma is basically a literary fiction novel, and it's the first novel from Bhutan written in English. Is it the first one written by a woman in English or just in general? I'm slightly confused regarding that, but yes, it is one of the first acclaimed works from Bhutan written in the English language, and being from a country where not a lot of popular fiction gets published, like in Bhutan obviously these works are acclaimed, but outside of the country, or at least outside of South Asia, they don't usually get much praise. But I swear, for the Around the World Reading Challenge, everyone reads this book. Like, this is the book to go to, considering the fact we have such few options. And I really enjoyed it. It talked about a lot of important socially relevant topics. In this book, we follow our main character, Tomo, from her childhood all the way to old age. And I quite like books which chronicle the entire life of a character, where we grow with them across several decades and experience all the things that they go through, all the people that they meet, all the places that they go to. And this book had a very strong emphasis on that. Now, it also cleared up a lot of misconceptions I had regarding Bhutan as this kind of egalitarian utopia where, you know, everyone is equal and everyone lives very happily. And while that is to an extent true nowadays, it's that in the past it wasn't always so. It's kind of due to the efforts of the governments in recent decades that Bhutan has reached the point where it has now. It is a wonderful place to live as of now, but at the time period where this book is taking place, not so much. We begin in this village in the Bumtang province, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, I'm pretty sure, yes, in Bumtang. And Somo is born in a financially well-off family. However, as a girl, she is denied the right to education. She really wants to learn to read and write, but she can't because of the gender that she was assigned. So that is quite unfortunate, and After the death of her mother, she decides to leave from her village one day, and that somehow sets her off on a journey that takes her all the way from Bhutan to various parts of India. She goes to several important Buddhist pilgrimage sites, and along the way, she begins to discover for herself what she wants in life. And she does have several unfortunate encounters with terrible people along the way. All of those encounters stay with her and solidify her desire to become a better practitioner of the Dharma. And yeah, it's just a really profound read. The writing style is rather solemn, and while not entirely lyrical, from time to time there are quite beautiful introspective passages dropped in that I did find myself writing down, copying down into my commonplace book. It's definitely a book that I would recommend to anyone who would just like to get a bit more insight into the country of Bhutan as it used to be in the 1940s onwards till I guess the 80s. Since then it has changed quite a bit, but that time period is reflected quite well, along with post-independence India. She spends quite a lot of time in regions of India as varied as Darjeeling and Kalimpong all the way to New Delhi and Bodh Gaya. So yeah, it's just a really cool book in terms of the time period and the places it's representing. Places that usually don't get written much about in literature. After that book, in an immense tonal shift, the next book that I picked up and completed reading is The City of Glass by Cassandra Clare. And yes, this is the third book in the extremely popular Mortal Instruments series. And what can I say? I mean, I can't really say much about this without spoiling the first two books. But yes, if you somehow haven't heard of this series, it's basically a kind of urban fantasy series in which it starts off in New York, and we follow our main character, Clary Frey, who one day discovers that she can suddenly see all of these supernatural creatures like vampires and werewolves, and she finds herself drawn into this group of people who call themselves shadow hunters, who go around killing demons and maintaining the order in this supernatural world that exists alongside the humans. So yeah, that's, very classic 2000s fantasy. It became the cornerstone for a lot of urban fantasy that came after it. And yeah, I get why it's popular. Like, it's very compulsively readable. You just find yourself flipping the pages. And sure, the characters are mostly really idiotic. Clary is like barely there. Like, sometimes you forget that she is sort of the main character. We follow other characters' POVs too, including a bunch of the shadow hunters, one of her best friends, Simon, who honestly is like the only sane person in the entire cast of characters. Everyone else just makes so questionable decisions and goes around getting themselves into all kinds of scrapes for no good reason. And yeah, I just wanted to get through this before I can pick up The Infernal Devices, which is set in Victorian England, and that one is somehow more popular and well liked than the original series. And I don't like spoilers, so I want to go into that series knowing everything that happens in these three books. And I guess I'll soon be engaging in a kind of tandem reading. I read one book of The Infernal Devices and then move on to book four of this, and just continue alternatively in publishing order. And that could potentially be fun. In this book, we finally see more of the Shadowhunter realm apart from New York City. In this, they go to the capital city of the Shadowhunters called Alicante, which is the city of glass. And over there, there's a bunch of issues that crop up, and yeah, we get our final showdown of the main trilogy. There are three more books in this series, but I don't see how they can continue. The story is all pretty tied up. In this third book, there are no open ends. Everything seems resolved. So it'll be interesting to see which direction the story moves on from book four onwards. Oh, and I nearly forgot to mention the ratings of these books. I don't know why that slipped my mind, but Circle of Karma was 4 stars and City of Glass was a 3.5 stars. Honestly, 3.5 is a bit generous. Okay, I'm just glad to be done with the series, that's why. But after I finished City of Glass, there was a very stark genre shift once again, all the way from YA urban fantasy to scientific nonfiction. Nonfiction is a genre that I typically don't read from because most of the ones you see around are those like self-help ones or like financial hustle culture books, which I'm completely uninterested in. However, scientific nonfiction, that's something that I desperately want to get into as a person who will be pursuing a degree in STEM in a couple of months. I do want to learn more about the scientific world, particularly things related to chemistry and toxicology, which is what I'll be studying. So I picked up Venomous by Christy Wilcox. It's Venomous: How Earth's Deadliest Creatures Mastered Biochemistry, because most scientific nonfiction books do have a pretty long subtitle. This is a book that I've been reading sort of on and off for 3 entire months, and I finally finished it in February. It is quite short as far as nonfiction, scientific nonfiction books go. It's only about 270 pages or so, at least the digital edition that I read. And it basically describes different venomous creatures on Earth, ranging from all kinds of habitats, from the Amazon rainforest to the marshes of Indonesia to the Grand Canyon. And yeah, obviously there were snakes in it. And I have a phobia, so reading this at night, that was more terrifying than any horror movie. It was just, there were even diagrams of the snakes, and that's the only part which was unsavory about this. I quite liked learning about the biochemistry behind the venoms of different creatures, and the chapter that I found especially interesting was how these venoms, that whose main purpose is to wound or kill their prey or predators, could be transformed into life-saving medicines. The writing style of this book was mostly readable because about 60% of it was in lay language. However, when it suddenly shifts to like giving paragraphs upon paragraphs about very complex immunological reactions, yeah, those lost me. I have studied biology in 11th and 12th, and so I have a basic working understanding of the mechanisms. However, most of the stuff I have learned has already fled my brain. And as for the other half, those were deleted portions. So we weren't even taught that. And I just read the textbook, for curiosity, didn't properly sit down and study it because they weren't there for the syllabus. So yes, my understanding had several gaps in it. I did look up some stuff on Google and learn quite a bit, but it's still not enough for me to understand every single process or reaction mechanism that was described in the book. The author kind of has this writing style where she will intersperse several personal anecdotes. So, times when she goes on field assignments to these creatures' natural habitats to study them. And I'm always amazed at the idiotic risks that some people take in the name of science. I mean, I understand curiosity, but don't you value your life more? So yeah, I was pretty horrified when the author just writes about some of the stuff she does. I'm like, why? Shouldn't there be some protocol before you do these kind of stuff? But yes, keeping aside my horror at the stuff some scientists do, most of it was quite entertaining, and I did find myself going down several rabbit holes of research regarding various creatures that were mentioned in this. And as someone who aspires to be a toxicologist in the future, all of this information was incredibly useful to me, and I will be reading more works regarding animal venom because that is a topic that I'm quite interested in. The next book that I read, moving back into fiction and into the genre which I am the most comfortable in, middle grade. So I read Dancing the Charleston by Jacqueline Wilson, and I found my first 5-star read of the year. Just epic, wonderful, brilliant. Oh, and yes, Venomous was 3.75 stars, I think. No, it was 3.5. I guess the scientific jargon did leave me a bit too lightheaded. So yes, that was 3.5 stars. But this, a perfect 5-star. Like, I just have to read more middle grade because I love middle grade. Why don't I read more of it? Why do I force myself to sit through mediocre YA books when I can read these glorious ones instead? So this was my second Jacqueline Wilson. I have read one other book by her 2 years ago, The Primrose Railway Children, which was a retelling of The Railway Children. And that one I gave another very easy 5 stars. So Jacqueline Wilson has certainly become a new favorite author of mine, and I will definitely be checking out all of her other books eventually. But yes, Dancing the Charleston is part of the really popular Hetty Feather series, but this one is taking place a bit later than those books which are set in the Victorian period. This is set in the 1920s in England. So the flapper culture isn't that much because, it's not taking place in America. It is in England. However, there are some of the elements of 1920s America here due to cultural osmosis. But yes, in this, we follow our main character, Mona, who lives with her aunt at the gatekeeper's cottage in this manor, and her aunt serves as a seamstress to the lady of the manor. However, when that elderly woman, who's like, I think 80 plus years old, dies and someone else inherits the manor, things change for Mona and her aunt for the better, because until that point they had been living in immense squalor and poverty. But then things take a turn for the better, and Mona finds herself frequenting the manor, going there for picnics and parties and hanging out with some of the kids who come to live there. And she's having a pretty good time, doing her own thing. But then some secrets come to light, and that kind of upends her life. That is the premise of this. And it is very reminiscent of Enid Blyton, because you have all of these wonderful descriptions of the English countryside and, the village and the food, or the glorious descriptions of food, the picnics they go on, the dresses that her aunt sews. It's just really beautiful. However, you also have the plus of not having certain things that Enid Blyton likes to casually drop in, like xenophobia and racism and just really problematic stuff. And Jacqueline Wilson does not do that because she is not living in the 1930s, I guess. So yeah, if you want a less problematic version of Enid Blyton books, Jacqueline Wilson is the way to go. There's a reason she was knighted for her services in children's literature, all right? So yeah, the only criticism, I guess, it's not even criticism, the secrets that come to light, which are hinted at in the blurb, they only become relevant at like the last 50 pages of the book. Until then, there's not a word of them, and suddenly all of these things happen, and then the ending happens, and it was a bit abrupt. The twist was kind of predictable. I mean, I didn't exactly predict it. I just had like a random thought that came up, like so out of left field. It was a weird thought, and somehow that developed into a working theory that got proven. Like, I swear, the thought, it was like almost an intrusive thought, and then that became the twist. So that was cool to see, I guess. There were a lot of hints towards it though. But then again, this is a middle grade book, not a mystery thriller. The twist really isn't the point. And as for it being part of the Hetty Feather series, you can definitely read it as a standalone. It's a very self-contained story, and the only way it connects to the series is when in the very last chapter we get a cameo by Hetty Feather, and it doesn't really spoil anything. So definitely read this even if you haven't read, I guess, the 8 other books before this. But do check out the Hetty Feather series too, like I'm planning to, because that also sounds quite interesting. And the title doesn't really tie in to the rest of the story. Like, the only time it becomes relevant is when she just breaks into the Charleston when she becomes happy. Like that's it. It's just mentioned like 4 or 5 times. They just like dance the Charleston sometimes. It's not relevant to the story. It's just part of the setting, the vibe, alright. But yes, 5-star read, absolutely immaculate. I love Jacqueline Wilson. After that, by the time it was the week leading up to Valentine's Day, I decided to hold a weekly readathon reading romance books, and that was really fun. So these next 3 books, I'll just rush through them kind of quickly because I do have a very long 40-minute video where I explain my feelings regarding the books I read in quite a lot of detail. So this will just be a kind of bare bones review. The first one that I read for that readathon was Hani and Ishu's Guide to Fake Dating by Adiba Jaigirdar. And I gave that book 4.5 stars because it was honestly really stellar. I quite enjoyed it. I have seen it a lot around Goodreads mostly. I don't really see it talked about a lot on BookTube, but Goodreads keeps recommending it to me a lot of the time, so I decided to pick it up. And in this book, we follow our 2 main characters, Humaira Khan and Ishita Dey. Yeah, that's the name. Yeah, those two, they are in high school in Ireland, and one day Humaira comes out to her friends as being bisexual, and they dismiss her orientation, saying that it's just a phase, and she already deals with a really toxic friend group, in case you didn't notice when they dismissed her. Yeah, but she always has to deal with microaggressions and just a lot of ignorance and just willful ignorance. Like they do not want to educate themselves, and casual bigotry and racism and Islamophobia. And it's not a great time, but for some reason she sticks with her toxic friends. But she wants to like prove them wrong, and so she just lies and says that she is dating Ishita. And yeah, that becomes a whole deal because they're clearly not together. So then they decide to fake date because Ishita also gets something out of it, namely the popularity of being around one of the, I don't know, cool kids at school. So when she runs for head girl, she'll be able to garner more votes because of her association to Humaira or Hani. So then that just snowballs from there. Lots of lies keep building up, but then they genuinely enjoy each other's company. Though before that, they kind of kept away from each other because they didn't want to be pigeonholed. Like they didn't want people saying that just because they're the only 2 brown girls at school, that's why they're friends. So yeah, but then they decide to continue with this ruse, and through the book we see both of them dealing with their own individual issues. Hani tries to, I don't know, grow a spine and stand up to her friends, while Ishu deals with several harsh familial expectations where her parents kind of want her to be the model child. They want her to always excel academically, and she's under a lot of strain due to that. And I quite enjoyed the individual storylines, the way they grow. I always find myself enjoying that more in contemporary romance books than the actual relationship between the characters. This one, it was also very sweet. However, I don't know, I just don't feel anything when I read romance books regarding the romance. The books themselves, I appreciate the plot, the storyline, the character growth, and relationships. However, the main romantic relationship just never does it for me. But I still read romance books because I like the plot. And yeah, the tropes seem appealing, but when I read them, they're just mid. This was okay. It had the grumpy ex sunshine dynamic going on, and I was able to relate quite a lot with Ishu because how she is in the book, it was like kind of crazy how similar that was to my middle school self. And yeah, it was just fun. Learned quite a bit about Bengali culture because despite being Indian, I don't know about every single culture within my country, so this was really cool to read about. And I will be reading other books by this author. She has, I think, 3 or 4 ones. I have one on my shelf right now, A Million to One. So I will be picking that one up soon. After that, I read an absolutely wonderful book. Okay, from enjoyment factor alone, this feels like a 5 star. However, there were some criticisms that I had regarding it that made me pull it down to 4.5, and that was The Ornithologist's Field Guide to Love by India Holton. And oh my god, like I was drawn to this book after reading the blurb, which is just so hilariously done, and the whole book had that same type of humor, that very specific variant that does not work with a lot of people, but for me it was exactly my brand of humor. And it did lean a bit into, yeah, it was very much slapstick comedy, but I love slapstick comedy, so this book worked for me. And the premise is that this is a historical fantasy almost, but it's kind of like a low fantasy book set in Victorian England, and we follow our two main characters who are rival ornithologists. So in this world, there are these magical birds with all kinds of different powers, and some of them are really dangerous. And so there are these like entire ornithology departments dedicated to the study of these birds. And yeah, we follow two such ornithologists, Beth Pickering from Oxford and Devon Lockley from Cambridge. And I mean, they don't really hate each other. They just like, they find each other inconvenient when trying to study birds, because one of them will turn up and steal the bird the other was eyeing, and it's just a whole mess. But then they find themselves having to work together in order to win a prestigious award, the Birder of the Year award, that is offered by the International Ornithological Society for the capture of this really rare species of bird called the Caladrius. And a lot of ornithologists across the world come to England and are on a hunt across the Isles in order to find this bird. And yeah, it's just a total hoot. All right, this is a book that does not take itself seriously. It definitely leans into the comedy angle. Like, I swear, this puts the comedy in romantic comedy. All right, this is just, my god. Now, the reason why I can't give it a 5 stars is because the romance was uh, it frustrated me, all right, because like how do I explain it? I went into this expecting it to be a clean romance, and it was mostly all right, but there were a few double entendres. Is that how you pronounce that word? I've never pronounced that aloud, but I'll put it on the screen because I hope I'm not mispronouncing it. Right, and those made me uncomfortable. I really hate it when characters remark on the physicality of each other, and yeah, this book had a lot of that. So it was just, yeah, that frustrated me. But still, most of the romance was sweet enough. And the ending was like very much Hallmark movie, really sappy, but I didn't mind. And now that I've read this book, I can read the sequel. But it's more like a companion novel because all of these are standalones but set in the same time and same world, following characters who also know each other. Like, you know how most romance series are a series, they're not like following the same couple, just like different ones who all exist in the same space. Yeah, like that. I don't need to explain how series work to you. But yes, so the next one is called The Geographer's Map to Romance, and that's coming out in April. It was supposed to come out this month, but it got delayed, I think. So yeah, I'm really excited for that one because we follow the cousin of the guy in this one, and he seems to be a much better archetype of character, because this character Devon Lockley was just like the charming flirtatious rake, and I hate male characters like that, especially when they are the love interest, and I just can't tolerate the romance anymore. Like, as soon as these kind of characters come on the page, I'm like, okay, this sickens me, I'm out of here. So yeah, but the main character, like the guy in the next book, is much more tolerable. He's like very reserved, studious, only focused on his like academic career, which I think is great. That's wonderful. So I think I will enjoy that book way more than this one, and I'm looking forward to that, because if this was 4.5 stars, that's a definite 5 star read. And after that, the third and final book I picked up for that readathon was Spellbound by F.T. Lukens. This is the third book by the author that I've read. I've previously read In Deeper Waters, and so this is Ever After. And so I picked this one up expecting it to be more or less the same as those other two, but this was surprisingly urban fantasy, and that is quite shocking because I wasn't expecting it to be urban fantasy, and I don't really like urban fantasy that much. Then again, my only frame of reference is the Mortal Instruments series that I've read recently that falls under urban fantasy, and yeah, the less said about that series, the better. This was much better, obviously, and it had more of a cozy vibe to it despite some high stakes plot situations. So I liked that it took a slower approach to the whole urban fantasy genre. And in this, we follow our main character, Edison Rooker, who, after the death of his grandmother, is shut out of the magical community because he himself doesn't possess magic. And in an attempt to be around magic again, he goes around trying to get apprenticeships. And finally, he somehow secures one with the most powerful sorcerer in the whole world, like in this book. And yeah, that is quite shocking. However, he also manages to create a device which he names a spellbinder that enables him to see ley lines, and thus he can basically see the currents of magic in this world despite not possessing the innate ability to do so. But that is a highly illegal thing to do, and so when his mentor, the sorcerer that he works for, Antonia Hex, gets arrested by the authorities, he has to work alongside the apprentice to Antonia's rival. The apprentice is called Swan, and their mentor, the rival sorcerer Fable, also gets arrested along with Antonia. So now they both have an incentive to work together, and they have to figure out how to free their teachers and also just stand up to this kind of totalitarian regime in this book, which restricts access to magical knowledge to most people, and yeah, just is not a very good government, I guess. I mean, they do a good job of maintaining order, but that comes at the expense of people's freedom of speech and practice of magic, I guess. All magic is like very tightly regulated, and everyone is monitored by this government, and all practicing sorcerers have to like pay a very hefty amount of tax to the government in order to get a license to practice magic in this world. So yeah, it has a lot of remarks, social commentary on. You can read a lot of the things that happen in this book as parallels to the real world. So, we have governments that restrict access to knowledge to certain sections of society, and also gatekeeping done in several communities. The way Rook is shut out of the magical community because of certain arbitrary criteria that they set for themselves is very reminiscent of how some people are gatekept from queer and neurodivergent communities because they don't fit all the little check boxes that some people have made up to gain access to these communities, even though they are a part of it. So, yeah, there's a lot to think about in here. The ending is kind of very easy for the characters, it resolves really quickly, and yeah, the whole standing up to government dystopian element was just, swept aside really easily. And I mean, I get it. This is more of a cozy fantasy, and you don't want to make things too hard for these teenagers. But still, we could have gone for a bit more depth. As for the romance itself, which is the reason I picked this up for the romance readathon, it was it was okay. Like it was cute. Again, grumpy ex sunshine trope is there. Dislike to liking to loving each other as romantic partners, I guess. That was there. And yeah, it was all right. Like I don't feel anything when I read romance books. What can I say? I don't feel the swooning or like the little clenching of my heartstrings, nothing. So I can't really recommend this on the basis of a romance, but as book itself, I will recommend it. This is a very solid 4 stars. And yeah, it's a pretty good read for those who are looking for a slower paced urban fantasy. The next book that I picked up, we go right over to the nonfiction genre again, and that is Hopeless Aromantic, An Affirmative Guide to Aromanticism by Samantha Rendell. So I obviously picked this up in February because we have the Aromantic Awareness Week going on, and because it is the month of love. But somehow Valentine's Day and February is always associated with only romantic love, even though love comes in all different forms. And for aromantic people, this definitely feels rather exclusionary because, why don't you celebrate familial love, platonic love, self love? Those are all equally valid and important. Sometimes even more so than romantic love. All of these relationships that are formed from like the moment of your birth with your family, through your childhood with your friends, and then I guess with yourself too. These are important and we should not ignore them. So I read this book kind of in solidarity with Aero people. I mean, I guess I fall somewhere on the spectrum too, but I don't think too much about this. And the whole point of this book is that the author herself has also kind of discarded her labels because she went through a lot of questioning of her identity. And yeah, at the end, it's how labels make you feel. Like if they make you feel constricted, there is really no point. This book was a very quick guide to aromanticism. It's a good entry point to people who aren't aware of the concept at all. In simple terms, aromanticism is basically having little to no romantic attraction to people. Again, it's about attraction, not action. Same thing with being ace. So yeah, it clears up a lot of misconceptions people have about aromantic people, some of which are just wild. Like, why would you even think that? That's like so bonkers. But yes, and it also goes into a lot of micro labels, explaining them, which I found really useful. Though I knew most of the stuff already. Being in the A spectrum, a lot of the micro labels are transferable to the Aero spectrum too, so I was aware of it. But it was still good to see a comprehensive listing of them all. And interspersed through the book are several personal anecdotes of the author, also kind of memoir segments from other Aero people too. And some of that was really difficult to read because yeah, people think that if you are aromantic you get off easily, like people don't really harass you. It's one of the easiest queer identities to be, which I think this is not the oppression Olympics, and also it is untrue. Like lots of people face stigma for being aro too. And yeah, this just goes into a lot of heartbreaking accounts, and it just like, why are people so horrible to others just minding their own business? Like, they aren't even doing anything. Like, what do you have to be angry about? So, yeah, that was a really, introspective, eye opening read, quite informative too. And it also made me feel quite affirmed in my identity. Like, you don't need to have labels to feel a certain way. You don't need to box yourself, which is something I really needed to hear at that time. So, yeah, that was that. Very quick read, only about 200 pages. It just felt like an extended version of a fun article or maybe even a YouTube video. The author is a YouTuber, so that makes sense. And after that, I read An Elegy for Easterly by Bettina Gappa. And I read this as part of the Around the World Reading Challenge, the February edition for Zimbabwe. And yeah, I was just looking around online for a book that would really, represent the country, because yeah, you can read any book written by a Zimbabwean author and count it for the challenge. But, when I read from other countries, I really want to learn more about the reality of living in that country, learn more about the history and like the social circumstances that people live through. So yeah, I thought this was a good pick for that because it is a short story collection and it had 13 short stories, and each of those is basically exploring people, their lives from different sections of society. and they're all set either during or after the rule of Robert Mugabe, who was a really terrible dictator, started this whole authoritarian regime in post-colonial Zimbabwe. And it was a very difficult and grueling read because, yeah, a lot of the things that these characters go through are horrifying. And it was just, I wouldn't read this for fun. If I weren't doing the Around the World challenge and wanted to pick a representative book for Zimbabwe, I would never have read this book. I wouldn't even have heard of it. And I didn't like most of the short stories. Most of them just made me feel really icky and sad and miserable. And yeah, I don't like reading sad, realistic fiction, okay? Like, life is hard enough already. I don't need to feel miserable due to fiction as well. So I gave this a solid 3 stars. My favorite short stories out of them, and by favorite I mean the most tolerable out of them, were The Annex Shuffle, Aunt Juliana's Indian, and Our Man in Geneva Wins €1,000,000. These three were the ones that I wouldn't say enjoyed. Yeah, I mean, they were all right, okay? I got through them quicker than the others, and I went away feeling less, well, some of them are sad, but like, I didn't feel very suffocated after reading these three. So yeah, that was an elegy for Easterly. And if you are looking for an around the world reading pick for Zimbabwe, I would recommend this because it really portrays the reality of living in Zimbabwe at that time from all different sections of society, so many different people, so many different lived realities in different parts of the country too. So I would recommend it for that kind of educational perspective. For enjoyment, definitely not. Like, this is one that I would never like willingly make myself read for anything other than this prompt. After that, the next book that I picked up was Remains of Spring by Jibon Krishna Goswami. And this is actually a translated book from Ahomya, and the original title is Aulyangar Jui. And this, I saw it in the library when I went to return my books and pick new ones. It was just calling out to me. Okay, I read the title and then I read the subtitle, A Naga Village in the No Man's Land, and I was like, I have got to read this. Okay, like, once I leave from here, I would never be able to come across books like this, regional fiction from my country, especially translated ones like this, which aren't very popular. Will never come across them again. So I've got to make the most of my current circumstances, my current library and all. So I picked this up, and this is basically set in the kind of bordering region, the strip of land between the borders of India and Myanmar, and this is set during the 1980s. So as of now, that kind of liminal space, which belongs to neither country, does not exist anymore. It has become absorbed by the two borders, kind of like converging, and now this place does not exist as a kind of no man's land. Obviously, the piece of land is still there, but it falls under either the domicile of India or Myanmar. And it's set in a Konyak village there called Hoyak. And yeah, I read this book. I picked this solely for the setting because I really love the northeast region of my country. I think it is a marvelous place. I am in awe of all the diverse cultures and ethnic groups who populate that region. But thinking about all the injustices that people, especially along the bordering regions, suffer has always made me really sad, especially in that time period where these states were, they were getting their own independent statehoods, and the consolidation of the Indian nation was happening, and all kinds of struggles were happening. And well, insurgency, I wouldn't really call it insurgency, because once you read books like this, you really think of it from a different perspective. I've always had a bit of a qualm with calling those rebel movements insurgency, because I mean, at the end of the day, the reason they are protesting is because their rights are being taken away. Their ancestral land is literally being exploited. Those resources are being looted. The land that their ancestors have lived in for millennia, that they call home, is being fought over like a scrap by foreign powers, and they really have no say in what is happening to them. Their way of life, their culture, their languages are being eradicated. They're being like cast aside, and they can only stand by and watch. So it is obvious that a lot of people will be very unhappy with what is happening to them, because it is unfair, it is unjust, and so they would naturally take up arms against this oppression that is happening to them. And yeah, that is what Remains of Spring chronicles. So the title Aolyang Arjui literally means the fires of Aolyang, and initially it didn't really make sense to me why the title is the way it is, but after reading the book, it does make sense. Aolyang is the spring harvest festival of the Konyak people, and that's why it's called Remains of Spring, because Aolyang takes place during spring. And yeah, in this village, Hoyat, they have been dealing with a really terrible state of existence where either the Indian army or the Myanmar army constantly encroaches on their village, just fights with the people there, thinking that they are rebels or at least sheltering them, and just shells it from time to time. And these explosions cause the village to burn down like every couple of years, and they have to like go into hiding in the jungle, return back once their village has been burned to the ground, and then rebuild again over and over and over again. Like, can you imagine living in such a situation where your home is just getting burned down? You're no fault of your own, again and again and again, and you just have to pick up the ashes and keep going. And yeah, that's why it's called Fires of Aolyang, because during the spring festival, when they should be celebrating their harvest, when they should be having a good time resting and preparing for the new season, they instead have to literally build their village up from scratch due to the fires that rage due to the bombing. So yeah, this is translated by Manjit Barua from the Ahomya, and the author kind of bases the main character in this on himself. So the main character, Atanu, is a teacher in Assam, and due to a mutual acquaintance, he somehow ends up going to the village of Hoyat at the request of a villager there called Anyam. And when he shows up there, the people are elated because now their children will finally have access to proper education. And they think that that will be their ticket out of this misery that they live in. And unfortunately, things don't go to plan. When Atano reaches the village, it has once again just been burned down and people are rebuilding. And it, through his eyes, we kind of observe what life is like living in a war zone, in this liminal space that does not fall within the border of any country, following a people who have been torn apart by these two powers fighting over their land, who have no say in their future, in their current lives. And it's just really miserable. I thought from the premise it would kind of be like Lunana, that Bhutanese movie where a teacher from Thimphu goes to this really remote region, very rural region in, was it Laya? Not sure. I think he goes to Laya. And over there he teaches the kids in the local school, and yeah, it's a pretty transformative experience for him, and the students also gain a really good education. And I thought it would be similar to that. However, in this book, despite Atano being a teacher, literally no teaching gets done. It's just kind of a slice of life almost. I hesitate to say it because slice of lives are usually cozy and comforting, and this was certainly not that. It just, through his eyes, we see what the reality of these people are. Like, we see them go about the motions of everyday life, but then over it all just looms this cloud of impending war, impending destruction. You see how people, despite their situation, try to make the best of it and keep living with hope. Like, the arrival of Atano is a symbol of their hope that the future will get better. This is by no means a slow paced book, things are constantly happening. However, the plot doesn't really have a direction. Like, it's not kind of like from point A to B, these things happen. It's mostly like just meandering as we see just small snippets of how life is like in a Konyak village in that time period. And yeah, I can't really comment on the writing style because this is a translated work of fiction. I don't speak Ahomya, so I don't know how it would sound like in the original language. The translation, I guess the translator did a pretty good job, and it's all right when he's just describing dialogue or like just the regular narration. However, there are several points where Atano is having, I don't know, introspective philosophical musings, and those are always really weird. They don't feel clunky, they just feel bizarre. And apologies if there are now background noises. There's a temple procession happening, and I don't know how long that will take, so I'm just gonna speed through there's only one book left, okay? I'm just gonna finish the video now. So yes, Auliang Arjui, or Remains of Spring, a really very harrowing read, kind of bleak, but unlike an LG for Easterly, this had a lot of hope in it, hope that unfortunately gets dashed time and time again, but still a very important read. If you are Indian, you definitely should read it. Even if you aren't, just read it, because it doesn't hurt to know more about history. And as of the situation now, as I said, Hoyat would right now probably be part of the Indian territory in Nagaland. And yeah, things are much better now. Like, people are more or less all right, and the government has improved. It's still nowhere near perfect, but at least they have a lot more autonomy and they can decide their lives now under their state governments. And yeah, things aren't perfect, they never are, but we're slowly getting there, and hopefully things will look much better in a couple more decades. That's the situation everywhere in the country. Can't do much about it except hope, and that's the main point of this book. Hope that things will improve in the future. And now for the final book that I read in the month of February. This is a sequel to a book that I read in January, I think, which is shocking. I never complete series this quickly. It usually takes a good 2 or 3 years between the first book and the second book by the time I get around to it. But this was Dark Star Burning, Ash Falls White by Amelie Wundrau, and that is the sequel to Song of Silver, Flame Like Night. I swear, these titles are so damn long. Like, why are they so complicated to remember? But yes, this is basically a Chinese-inspired YA fantasy, and I'm not gonna go into the plot of this one because spoilers, but in the first book, we're basically set in this world which is kind of like fantasy China, I guess, and it gets invaded by these European coded colonists called the Alancians, and then they go around just wiping out the culture of this place called the Middle Kingdom, basically Zhongguo or China. And yeah, just being terrible and horrid, because colonization is always terrible and horrid. And we follow our main character, Lan, who works as a song girl at this tea house in a port city. When her life gets endangered, one day she finds herself rescued by this practitioner, and practitioners are thought to be all eradicated either by the Alancians or by the previous regime that ruled this land. So yeah, this really comes as a shock to her, and then they both team up, and somehow Lan is the key to saving the kingdom, because of course she is. And yeah, they just go into the heartland of the country, and over there they kind of figure out a way to make use of this mark on her wrist to, I don't know, summon demon gods and then fight against the army of the Alancians. And it's like a whole deal. And yeah, the first book ends, and in this book it's just kind of continuation of that cliffhanger ending, and we follow these two characters as they go on separate journeys to figure out different ways to stop the Alancians. And one of the places that they go to reminded me of Dunhuang, that oasis city in the middle of the desert, one that is really famous for its cave paintings, Dunhuang culture. It would have been a really vibrant thing if it existed now, but somehow I don't know why Dunhuang got abandoned. they died out, and no one knows what happened. It's like a really mysterious part of Chinese history. So yeah, that. And one thing that I like about this series is that it doesn't just comment on colonization by external forces, it also really sheds light on like the forced assimilation of ethnic minorities, something that for some reason China is just so damn adamant about doing and then pretending not to have done throughout their history, really. So yeah, this really shines a spotlight on that issue that people forget about, that colonization can be done by people who look like you and who have cultures that are slightly similar to yours too, not just by completely foreign invaders. So yeah, I quite like the themes discussed in this. However, the exposition heavy writing style is still too clunky. There was so much repetition. Like some phrases just got repeated so many times. I was like, aren't we done? And yeah, the romance between the two main characters just continues into this really like angsty tangle in this one, and it's like, oh my god, I hate you. It's like the lovers to enemies, I don't know, stop that we have to make in any series for it to be interesting, apparently. And yeah, they're trying to kill each other. It's a whole deal. It's fine. There was a knife through the throat scene, you know, that trope. At least in this one, it wasn't as terribly done as usual, so points for that. And the conclusion was just, I did not think the author would take it there, but she did, so that's cool. I guess that's the only way it would have worked. Alright, otherwise, it would have cheapened the story even more. There are still a few cultural nitpicks that I have with it, not as much as in the first book, but still enough that I could make a whole video reviewing just these two. And yeah, with that said, let's just stop the reviews here. I gave this one 3.75 stars. And yeah, that's all for this, alright? Okay, cool. I rated everything. The procession's starting again. So I'm gonna stop it here. Really chaotic ending. And I hope you enjoyed this new place where I'm doing my videos. Thought it would be more cozy and also more comfortable for me, and it works with the timing. Even though there's still disturbances from the road, not as much as in front of my bookshelf. Alright, so maybe this is gonna be a permanent location. And with that said, I hope you had a great month of reading in February. March should be better. It might be, hopefully, at least you get 3 more days. Okay, 3 more days is pretty cool. And yeah, just stay safe and happy reading. I'll catch you all in my next video. Until next time, Zai here.